Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rosie Report Podcast, where I chat with industry changemakers about reimagining a more equitable future of work in advertising and marketing. I'm your host, Steph, founder of We Are Rosie, and today I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our guest, Bennett Bennett, former copywriter at The Drum, who recently transitioned to freelancing and consulting on marketing and content under the name Aerialist. Bennett's name may ring a bell for you. He's had a big week as he recently spearheaded the open letter from 600 Black creatives and makers to ad industry executives with 12 urgent action items as a resounding call for change in the advertising industry. Today, we're going to be chatting about his journey going independent and being a voice of making change in our industry. Welcome, Bennett. We're so happy to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, you have had a wild, week. How are you feeling? How are you doing personally?
I want to say that this is maybe the best rested I have been all week. A long time coming, it feels. Time is already such a fluid thing, given we're all working from home in a pandemic. We are having such a singular moment in American history, and to kind of add to that in the way that my colleague Nathan Young and I and 600 plus advertising employees did is just it's hard to capture in words, but it's just good to get to Friday.
Yeah. I mean, I think the work that you and Nathan have done and the attention that it has garnered in this industry, I'm seeing new articles in the press about it every day and kind of these offshoot conversations that it's creating. I imagine that was the intent. I would love to just get inside your mind. I know that this came about quickly and that you mobilized your crew and got this kind of out into the world in a pretty amazing turnaround. I'd love to just hear what was your inspiration and what was the journey like to, creating this letter, creating this call for change and getting it out into the world.
Yeah. A lot of it was really serendipity. I spent a good portion of maybe when were the first protests, almost 2 weeks ago, just calling out the ad industry, whether it was the trades. I think my first target was the trade publications. As my last job, I was the U.S. staff writer at The Drum. I got to cover markets such as Minneapolis, very American heartland cities. Obviously, one of the major target locations in that area was looted. And I immediately said, what are agencies like Periscope and Cole McFoy out in that area going to do? How are the ad trades going to cover this? Because this isn't just some race story. This is a brand story. Like, a Target got looted. It's not, there's no, like people may think there's no rhyme or reason to do looting, but there has to be something specific about something that's such a staple for Minneapolis. They've got Target Field where the Twins play. It's such a big name that, why not? So I was just kind of venting / lamenting about the situation we were in. And Nathan Young happened to reply to one of my tweets. And I just immediately slid in the DMs and said, "Yo, are you okay?" First of all, what's going on? And he happens to live 4 blocks away from where Mr. Floyd's residence is. So very, very close to home in the literal sense. And he said, "I want to do something." I think, we have to try to not necessarily mobilize, but just, maybe pen a letter, because, brands are messing up, but there's no real agency response. And the fact of the matter is, we are arbiters of culture, in the same way that journalists can be, but more so because, brands pay us to push out messages to Black culture, to American culture. And, meanwhile, on the inside, it's not all, daisies and flowers and rainbows for Black employees. So I said, you know what? Sure, let's do it. And we got the letter in. We got some input from a lot of veteran folks in the industry that we admire. It was a process just to like edit down to 12 points that didn't feel overwhelming for white executives.
Yeah.
We felt that this wasn't too much to ask for. And then we shared it. We shared it amongst our networks as quickly and as covertly as we possibly could, and then dropped a bomb.
Yep.
Dropped a bomb. Yeah.
We needed it. Thank you. I mean, it takes big action to create change. I think I'm curious to get your thoughts, right? But as someone who's spent 15 years in the advertising industry myself, like I was prompted to make big change personally because I felt like there was just too much kind of doing the least happening in our industry for too long. And we had created this like bubble around it where the excuses and the overcomplication of doing the right things and eradicating racism and talking about the rights of the LGBTQ community, all of it within the advertising space. Like we were just like, we'd gotten really complacent. Like the D&I panels were gonna get us through. So I appreciate you dropping the bomb, and I'm curious what the response has been.
It's been ridiculous. I've been blessed to work and live in the New York City area. So I've been involved as a copywriter at BBDO, top agency during its time. Wrote for the Drum. Been involved in different advisory boards and stuff. So, I got to know a lot of dope people just across the space. And the personal response from a lot of them was, Bennett, oh my gosh, we are proud to know you. That is brave what you and Nathan have done. We've heard from, I got an email from Nathan, and I got emails from even Mark Reed from WPP.
Wow.
And he's like, we want to talk. So, from personal friends that I met at the beginning of my career to just executives in the highest annals of this industry, they've all reached out. They've all had something to say, mostly positive from my Black peers and non-Black POC allies, a lot of white allies, and accomplices, as I like to call them. I'm not a fan of ally as a word. I think if you're really going to stand for something, there has to be some sort of sacrifice, whether that's time, whether that's money, whether that's just systemic action to push back against systemic racism. It's not just going to take being anti-racist, in my opinion, to shake the tables and get the change that a lot of us deserve. Not just Black employees, but employees from every makeup.
I love that. Are you? Is it safe to say? How are you feeling? Optimistic that?
Optimistic is a kind word. So I came up through the diversity initiatives. I came up as a MAPER. I was honored as an Ad Color Future back in 2014, and I was a literal diversity hire when I started BBDO. So it's hard for me to say optimistic when so much investment was placed in me to build a career agency side. And, I got to work long enough at an agency to know that, the system has so many flaws that it's going to take quite a long time to make good on them. Am I optimistic for my peers who have heard from agencies, a lot of indies especially, that they're starting to make moves in that regard? Yeah. But optimism for me is not optimism for everybody. I'm humbled and privileged to work and live in a large market. It's not that easy for markets that are maybe a little bit more a little bit smaller or a little less dense in terms of agency involvement to enact that kind of change. So, there's caution as much as there's optimism for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I try to always just find a way to be hopeful. Like, otherwise, what are we all doing here? But optimism is a lot to ask, especially given the systemic revolution that is going to be required to really see meaningful progress. So I think the work that you and Nathan and team have done and laying out these 12 steps and making it really easy, right? Like, this is what needs to happen. We're not going to have, 36 panels about it. This is what needs to be happen. And there needs to be an accountability. I think it's good. It gives me hope that you're hearing from the top, right? At the holding companies in particular. What do you think it's going to take for them to really hold themselves accountable, and actually do the things that are outlined here? And I encourage everybody to check it out. You can check it out on every industry pub. It was launched in Adweek, but what do you think it's going to take for them to really move? Like, I love seeing this grassroots revolutionary movement where people will not be silent anymore, which is great. And people feel like they have a voice, and I'm not even going to say comfortable, because they're still risking their jobs and their livelihoods to speak up, but they are speaking up. What do you think it's going to take?
It is absolutely going to take the leadership from the holding companies for sure, but I think more so the indies. I feel like they have much less to lose from their shareholders.
Yeah.
I also think that white executives need to do their work before they come to their Black peers with potential solves, right? I wrote a piece for a Medium blog like a week before this, and I said, listen, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Like, I have had to Google, I have had to do the work to fit within the structures that you put up. It is your job to take a walk in my shoes, understand where people like me are coming from when we are hurting from this, from such a casual act of murder, of injustice that was, and also take a hard look at the history of us speaking up in this. I know you spoke to Derek Walker in one of your recent episodes, and if there's any forefather of speaking up and calling these issues to attention, it's individuals like him. It may not have made him a ton of friends in the process, but he wasn't wrong. And he comes from a time when, this was much like it was common practice, but there was no Twitter. There was no Twitter to really rail against a management. And, he was speaking for people like me. And Nathan and I are hopefully using this to speak for the next few generations who do not need ad agencies.
Yeah. And I think, I hope that the pressure stays on. I think when I look at the system and the institution of advertising, I totally agree with you. Like, I'm keeping an eye on the independents who are able to be more agile, who don't have to answer to Wall Street. Although I'm hoping eventually that the fact that holding companies do have to answer to Wall Street pays off, because their investors should be paying attention to everything that's happening in our space right now. But I'm really hoping that we keep the pressure on. And to your point, this is not a fight that Black creatives and makers should be having on their own. It's got to be spearheaded by white and POC accomplices, to use your word. And I feel like everybody kind of has license at this moment. Like, if we were all in this collective slumber of this isn't our fight to fight, this isn't our mantle to carry, it's not our place. It's like the veil has been lifted, and everybody should recognize now that it is on every single one of us to stand up, to find our unique way. And not everybody has to be a revolutionary. Not everybody, the analogy I use is like, you don't have to go tear down a Confederate statue today, but it is on every single one of us to figure out what impact you can make, where you can push yourself way outside your comfort zone and really put your own skin in the game to create the change that you want to see. And I think it's been a really beautiful thing to see you and Nathan come together and find your unique way to speak up for justice and to fight racism in our industry. And I'm hoping that it's super inspiring for particularly white accomplices and people who want to be accomplices in this fight to really wake up and say, what can I be doing, right? What is my role in all of this, and how can I step up to the plate? So I think the work that you're doing is just so important, and we really want to thank you again for doing it.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that. You did have a really good point about Wall Street and shareholders' role in this, and I did posit that activist investors came for Twitter just a few months ago. Just because Jack Dorsey owns two companies may not be able to keep his hands in both pots, but holding company executives have their hands in about 50 or 60.
Yeah.
And stock prices for all those holding companies together are pretty cheap. Not that I would want a swarm of activist investors to come for, Omnicom and WPP and the rest of them, but maybe that might be what it takes, putting literal money where their mouths are to enact that change. So, that's just me ideating, but
yeah,
I'm a creative at heart.
I mean, it's an interesting thought, path to go down. It makes me think of also the role that brands play in all of this. And I think
Absolutely.
One of the things that I always am careful to note is like agencies take a lot of shit, right? Like they are the first ones to get dragged down. The brands that are bankrolling agencies have an equally important role to play in all of this. They have the money. Money is power. Money talks. Money gets things done. Like that's just where life is. And so what do you think the roles of brands is going to be coming out of this? I hope that the brands, the clients of these holding companies aren't sitting on the sidelines thinking like, oh, I hope they figure this out. But what would you say the role of the brands is going to be?
The role of the brands are just as important as the role of shareholders, as much as it is the role of the employees themselves. They are like, without any one of those three things, an ad agency cannot exist. It was very clear after those initial riots in Minneapolis, the CEO of Target made a statement basically supporting the fact that, we can take care of our employees. We can take care of, our inventory of stock. Yep. What needs to be taken care of is, the fact that, there's a huge bunch of people in this country who have historically, for centuries, been just treated as less than human. Not every company has quite taken that approach. Like Starbucks says it's for Black Lives, it supports Black Lives Matter, but won't let its employees wear the t-shirts. NASCAR has said, we're going to take down any visible Confederate flags from our racetracks, which is huge. So, bits and pieces of and I can't even say bits and pieces because these are major entities. Like Starbucks is, hundreds of stores worldwide. Same goes for NASCAR and its, influence on the American spirit as we know it. So, when brands like those have to take a stance, it also goes on them to say agencies like, who is creating the work?
Yeah.
Who are you hiring to create the work? Who are we aligned with? Because you're not just, you don't just work with us, you work with all these other brands. So if you have one brand that wants to be proactive in an approach, and other brands that feel more conservative. And I mean that in a relative term, not a political one. Business will be shifted.
Yeah.
They will drop an AOR just because, the value set of the clientele doesn't match up.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is like on brands to shift that conversation and work with, agencies and other marketing operations that align with where the consumer's going. Because at the end of the day, we're all consumers. We're all people, and you have to shift to where the power is, because that may not power in a way for these brands is money, but it's also in people.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to one of our big, I'll say it's a Fortune 10 tech company client, and their procurement team, when COVID hit, started to do kind of a resiliency check on their entire marketing supply chain. And it was literally who is going to stay in business, right? Who can we count on to exist if we hit this massive economic recession? And they were starting to make sure that they understood what the potential impact to their business could be if their marketing services providers were unstable or went away, right? Or went out of business. And I thought that was really interesting. And even in that moment, I started to think, well, what is your role as the brand, as the bankroller, in ensuring that the smaller businesses that you do work with can survive and thrive, right? Because otherwise we're just upholding the massive companies at the top, which are not going to traditionally be the innovators, right? The people who are coming in that are new, that are scrappy, that are bootstrapped, that are thinking about things differently. And now as we think about all of these major brands looking, I would encourage all of them to look at their supply chain in terms of exactly what you just said. Who within our supply chain shares our values, right? Every single brand on the planet is going to have to wear their values on their sleeves, and I don't think that they should all be the same. Everybody has something different to offer, and everyone can change the world in a different way. I believe this in my soul, at a brand, at a corporate level, and then as individuals, we all have unique gifts to give. But I really hope that brands are, putting the same rigor into looking at their supply chain and saying, do you share our values? Do you behave in a way that we would be comfortable with if you were our own employees, if you were a true kind of member of our organization? And I hope that begins to happen. I haven't seen it yet. I'm curious, if you have, I would love to hear about it. But I've heard a lot of brands evaluating agencies, asking them for diversity metrics, even in pitches. I think we're seeing some more of that and have been over the last couple of years. But I haven't heard, just maybe a handful of scenarios where the brand is saying, this is a requirement. If you want to do business with us, you need to hit this minimum threshold of diverse talent, of Black talent, of representative people working on our business. So I think I'm really hoping we see more of that. And I'm hoping that there is a really finite, hey, you either hit this number or we're not interested in working with you.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And, it's on, I almost want to, I've been challenging a lot of people lately, and I almost want to challenge the ANA, which is the trade body for all the national advertisers, to make that a requirement for its major brands. Because, again, we discussed this just a few minutes ago, if not for the brands, agencies can't really, what are they selling?
Yep.
So, I know there's pushback from probably major agencies that don't want to reveal the numbers or skew the numbers for, what they consider non-essential talent, which ironically is the most essential talent given that we're in a pandemic. But, if you can push agencies to say, hey, we are lacking in this, but here are some action steps that came from a letter from weeks ago that we're gonna try to work on, and hopefully reach the numbers that not only are reflective of America, but reflective of your audience. Because we want everybody to consume your brand and its products and uphold your ideals. And you mentioned resiliency. My family went through Superstorm Sandy years ago, so that was that took up a huge part of my career. And resiliency was like such a huge part of that. And when I think about things like diversity, inclusion, equity, those all equal resiliency for the future of agencies. Not just including our voices, not just making sure you have all these varied voices at the table, but making sure there's an equal share of voice. And we do not bring equity into enough of these discussions, and we should, because otherwise you're only solving for one problem, but not solving for the economic part of the issue. That is just as big.
You're like speaking to my heart, right? Like we have to redistribute wealth and power and influence in this industry, in this country, period, to see the change. And I think, right before the anti-racism protests heated up in this country, we released the Rosie Report, which was our, inaugural study and look into the data around modern marketing and how it can look and how do we evolve this industry to be more inclusive and equitable and sustainable, and to leave, less of an impact on our environment, even like all of these big themes of our time and of this, moment in time in our country were evaluated. And one of my favorite stats, right? Like we're a 2-year-old business. And we took the time to reflect back on, what was the diverse makeup of the people that we put to work last year. And I wasn't really surprised, but I have such a big sense of pride in the fact that 40% of the people that We Are Rosie put on projects last year were people of color. And for me, it was something obviously that makes me really proud to be doing this work, but also underscored for me the fact that we have been largely overcomplicating this, right? Which was my hypothesis when I started We Are Rosie, was like, we've made too many excuses. We've gone about it all wrong. There's no true accountability. If you create, but the trick is you have to create an environment where everyone feels welcome. You can't just start plugging diverse talent into a broken institution. Like if I think of the broken systems in the advertising industry, they will literally reject diverse talent because they were not built with everybody in mind. So I think it's going to be, we've got a long road ahead of us because we've got legacy systems and institutions that were not built for everyone, that if we don't repair the broken parts of the philosophies on which they were founded, we will continue to reject diverse talent and people that are truly representative of the culture.
Oh yeah, for sure. I got to look at that report last week just as it came out, and as somebody who has covered extensively what the future agency could look like during my time at the Drum, nobody really took that sort of a deep dive. I've covered quite a few indies in that process, and I'm impressed first off that 40%, that's not only just a high number, but I'd be hard pressed, objectively speaking, to find a major agency, indie holding company that is able to say that. Yeah. Like that is kind of ridiculous to me. And it is, to your point, just a product of just the perpetual motion of the way things are supposed to be, which is how so many of these agencies operate. And the way things are supposed to be led to the Me Too movement, led to things like the 3% conference. They've led to the initial Black Lives Matter protests. They have led to just about every revolution in human history. And it is wild. It is so supremely wild to me that not enough people read history to know that unless you are investing in the future and what that can look like, you are going to be hit with such a force that is equal to the force of your stubbornness,
Yep.
that you may break and crumble.
Yeah.
You may break and crumble under the weight. And that is honestly my biggest fear about the current agency structure, is that, not just that it doesn't feel like it can have some give for the rising tide of diverse talent and voices, but that it will literally just crumble under the weight of, trying to change too late.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I'll echo that sentiment. I've thought about it a lot. And I think we're going to see how much holding companies and agencies can withstand. I have this like saying, I did not make this up. I read it somewhere, but I think it's really applicable to the agency model and even the consultancy model. Like I'm thinking of the Accentures and Deloittes who are getting into the agency style business.
Right.
But the wind is blowing really hard, and some people are building walls and some people are building windmills. And historically, I think everybody can agree that we've seen a lot of walls be built in the advertising space. And we're now going to find out who can, actually use the force for change and create good within their own organization and be flexible and be that windmill. But I think it's a watershed moment. It feels like that to me. Does it feel like that for you too?
Absolutely. This literally does make or break advertising as we know it. And I guess I have to be here for the ride, right?
Yeah.
I'm still in it. I am invested in knowing that, there's a ton of kids a ton of young and older professionals who know that they bring value to changing the way marketing works. So, I root for those players and their role in shaping tomorrow's advertising narrative.
Yeah.
But it starts with their white peers, with the power and the privilege behind them, to not just listen to them, but walk alongside them. And obviously there are going to be mistakes along the way. Nobody's going to be perfect, but one of my favorite newsletters is Ellen McGurt's Race
Yes.
to, and one quote stuck with me, and it was towards the end. I don't remember who said it, but it was along the lines of, "I will give you grace if you give me effort."
Yeah. I love that. I love that. That actually leads me to my final question for you. We will not be going back to normal. That is so far gone, right? Which is actually a really, really good thing. I'm like, I see hope in that. What's one thing that you're excited to never see again from the old way, the old world?
I would say all white panels, but I'm moderating one next week. I'm excited to. Sheesh, that's so loaded, and I think I am excited to never, ever, 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 ever see a situation where the only executive at a major agency that is a person of color is the diversity and inclusion lead. I think I'm excited to see that, because we've tokenized it. We have also monopolized diversity and inclusion. And there's just so many dope, talented creatives who deserve to be CCOs or CTOs, dope strategists who deserve to be CSOs, dope, decision makers who deserve to be like the Michael Houstons of Gray, or Keith Cartwright, who just opened his own agency last week. And, Cartwright's major in its own way. He's one of the founders of Saturday Morning. The table's big enough for so many of us. Yeah. And we do not lose when everybody gets a chance to win,
Yes, it is not a zero-sum game.
No, it's not.
I love that. That was a really good answer. And Bennett, I'm so excited as you embark on your consulting career.
Thank you.
Where can our listeners find you on social and follow along on your journey?
Yeah, so you can find me normally on Twitter at Bennett Bennett. I do also have a Substack publication called Brand Plus Content. You can find my thoughts on the industry at brandpluscontent at .substack.com. So Bennett Bennett, my middle name's Devon. And you can find me Twitter, Instagram, Substack.
Yes. And your Substack publication is amazing. It's a must read. Everyone needs to sign up. Please go
Thank you.
sign up for that. Get it in your inbox. You can get a dose of Bennett. Bennett, thank you so much in the midst of everything that you have on your shoulders right now and everything that you're working towards. I really sincerely thank you for joining us. And I'm really proud to know you, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. The feeling's mutual for the work that you and the Rosies are doing to shake things out. So it's good to be in good company.
Love it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Rosie Report podcast. Subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, or follow us on whatever streaming platform you're on so that you never miss future episodes. You can also head over to wearerosie.com/podcast if you ever get lost, and we will see you soon.